If you clicked on this video, it's probably because you're trying to break a bad habit, one that you've tried to break before but failed. After each failure, you feel frustrated, guilty, and sometimes even lose faith in yourself. That's completely normal. I felt the same way, stuck in a cycle of trying, failing, blaming myself, and then starting again to task over and over until it feels like there's no way out. The worst part isn't the habit itself, it's the feeling of helplessness when you know it's hurting you but still can't stop. You set a goal, get motivated for the first few days, and then end up back at square one. The most dangerous thing is the guilt you feel every time you relapse. A feeling that silently erodes your self-esteem, making you start to believe I must not have enough willpower. But that's not the truth. I realized this after a long period of failure and self-discovery. Breaking bad habits is not just a matter of willpower, it's a matter of awareness. It's not that you're weak, it's that you don't fully understand how habits form and operate in the mind. When I started to approach the problem from a neuroscience and behavioral perspective, I realized that you don't have to fight a habit. You need to observe it, understand it, and systematically dismantle it. One of the first things that woke me up was realizing the true cost of bad habits. It's not just the loss of time or decreased productivity. The bigger cost is the erosion of self-confidence. You set a goal and then break it. You promise to stop scrolling on your phone at night, but you stay up until 2 a.m. watching one video after another. The next morning, you feel tired, frustrated, and stuck in the same old cycle. Over time, you start to believe maybe I can't change. Not only that, but the feeling of guilt after slipping up makes you cling even more tightly to the old habit. It sounds contradictory, but it's true. When you feel negative, your brain looks for a quick escape, often returning to the most familiar habit, and so you fall back into the very pattern you're trying to escape. You need to understand one important thing. Habits are not a moral stain or a sign of weakness. They are a biological mechanism, a cycle that the brain learns over time. Every habit, good or bad, is formed through a clear process. When you feel sad, you pick up your phone. When you're stressed, you snack. When you feel lonely, you turn on an entertaining video. In those moments, your brain learns, this action makes me feel better, and so it automatically repeats that behavior. Habits are like trails each time you walk them. They get deeper and more ingrained. But this doesn't mean you can't change. It simply means you must stop walking the same old path and start forging a new one. The problem is, we live in a world designed to make bad habits easier than ever. Every app, every ad, every platform is optimized to grab your attention, making you lose control without even realizing it. So, you're not just fighting yourself, you're fighting the system. If you ever think you're weak, stop. You're not lacking willpower, you're playing a rigged game where the odds are stacked against you. But that doesn't mean you can't win. You just need a new strategy. Not one based on brute force, but one rooted in understanding. The first step is to stop and be honest with yourself. What is this habit costing you? Not just in time or money, but in distance from who you want to be. Think about the times you felt empty after surfing the web for hours. Remember the terrible feeling after mindless eating. Reconnect with that pain, not to blame yourself, but to remind yourself you deserve better. Change doesn't start with an impulsive decision, but with deep awareness, I don't want to live like this anymore. From that moment, you take the first steps, not fast, not perfect, but in the right direction. To get on the right track, you have to know where you're being held back, and that begins with understanding how habits work. If you try to break free without knowing what's holding you back, you'll quickly find yourself back where you started. Just like before, habits aren't simply actions repeated over and over again. They're a series of mental reactions that follow very specific rules. If you haven't closely examined them yet, now is the time, not to blame yourself, but to take back control. Every habit follows a 4-step loop trigger: craving, action, and reward. It's this loop that makes the behavior more and more automatic over time, like a reflex. It all begins with a small moment, usually something you don't even notice a feeling, a familiar space or a subtle signal. That's the trigger. It might be the feeling of boredom when you sit on the couch. It could be the sound of a notification on your phone. Or it might simply be a pause in the silence that leaves you wondering what to do next. The trigger is often small, but it's enough to set off a chain reaction. Next comes the craving, not for the action itself, but for the feeling that the action brings. You don't truly want to turn on your phone. You want to feel distracted, entertained, or freed from the emptiness. That desire for a feeling is the strongest motivation. Then comes the action, the most visible part of the loop: scrolling through a screen, opening a snack, smoking a cigarette. Often, this is where people try to exert control through willpower. But if you don't address the trigger, you're fighting the wrong battle. Finally, there is the reward, the brief, pleasant feeling that follows. It is this reward that makes your brain remember the behavior and want to repeat it. And so, the loop keeps running, silently and powerfully. Every day, if you don't understand each link of the loop clearly, simply trying to stop will leave you drained and frustrated. The good news is once you recognize the loop, you start to gain control. When you have a choice, you can change. Not by resisting the loop, but by preventing it from starting in the first place. Because habits, no matter how strong, need conditions to survive. If you change the conditions, you change the outcome. Start with the trigger. If every time you lie down on the couch, you feel the urge to pick up your phone, change the environment, tidy the space, place your phone out of reach, or create a space reserved just for true rest. If you always snack while watching TV, don't keep snacks within reach. Don't even buy them. When the trigger is gone, the habit cannot start. If removing the trigger isn't possible, make it less appealing. Change the way you think about the reward. If you typically drink soda because it feels good, reframe it in your mind as a sugary drink that leaves you sluggish, unfit, and low on energy. When the reward loses its appeal, the craving weakens. Next, make the behavior harder to do. Leave your phone in another room. Log out of social media. Set app limits. Create small barriers. Each one is an opportunity to pause and choose differently. If it still feels too easy, add a small consequence to the behavior. For example, every time you absent-mindedly open social media, commit to doing 10 push-ups. The consequence doesn't have to be extreme, just enough to make the behavior feel less free. The brain learns quickly every time I do this. I pay a price. Is it worth it? Gradually, you'll see a shift. When the behavior becomes less accessible, the reward less appealing, and barriers more effective, the old loop begins to weaken. That's when you can begin to create a new path. You don't need to be perfect. You need to be consistent. One pause, one change in your environment, one different choice. Each of these small steps becomes a building block for a better version of yourself. What matters most isn't how many times you've failed. It's recognizing that you don't have to repeat the past. With understanding, patience, and a little mindfulness every day, you can break free from the old loop. Not with sheer willpower, but with a smarter strategy and a new belief in yourself. The fact that you're still here, reading until the end, is already a positive sign. You don't need to change your whole life in a single day. Just start with one small step, but in the right direction. And I believe you will.